My daughter screamed, "I wish you were dead instead of Dad," and slammed the door. I stayed calm. The next morning, I handed her an envelope and said, "This is what your father really left you." She opened it, read it, and her face went white, because what was written inside revealed. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin. The sound of the door slamming was a physical thing. It traveled down the hallway and struck me in the chest. I stood there, my hand still raised as if to knock on the wood that now separated me from my daughter. The air in the narrow space felt thick, and it carried the sharp, floral scent of her perfume, the one she'd worn since college. It mixed with the older smells of the house, lemon polish and the faint, permanent odor of the medication we could never fully air out. Her words were not an echo. They were a current, a live wire running through the silence. "I wish you were dead instead of Dad." 6 months. For 6 months, the grief had been a shroud we both wore, but mine was woven with a different thread. Hers was pure, angry, uncomplicated. Mine was heavy with secrets and promises, and now I lowered my hand. My fingers were cold. I turned from her door and walked back down the hall toward my own room. My steps were measured. There was no hurry. The damage was done. It began, as these things often do, with an object. A watch. His watch. A silver chronograph with a worn leather band. It had stopped working 2 years before he died, but he kept it on the nightstand. Danny believed it was his favorite. After the funeral, she asked for it. I told her I would find it. I had put it in the fireproof box for safekeeping, along with the other items, and then I had not opened that box again. I had not wanted to. Tonight, she had asked again. There was an edge to her voice that had become familiar. "Where is it, Mom? Did you lose it? Did you give it away?" "It's safe," I had said from the kitchen doorway. I was drying a plate. A simple, blue-glazed plate from the set we'd owned for 20 years. "Safe where? I want to have it. It's mine. He would have wanted me to have it." Her arms were crossed. She was dressed for a date or drinks with friends from the law firm. She looked so much like him in that moment, in her certainty. "It's in my room. I'll get it for you tomorrow." "Why not now? What's the big secret?" She took a step forward. "Is it like the car? You just decided to sell his car without even asking me." That was a month after the funeral. The car, a 10-year-old sedan, had sat in the driveway gathering pollen. The insurance was due. The registration. I sold it to Mr. Johnson down the street for a fair price. The money went into the household account, the one that had been drained and refilled and drained again so many times. When she found out, she called it disrespectful. She said I was erasing him. "The car was a machine, Danielle. It was costing money we don't have." My voice was calm. I had learned calm over years of delivering difficult news. You mean asterisk, you asterisk. You don't have. I could have helped. I offered to help. But you never tell me anything. You just do what you want." Her voice was rising, climbing that familiar ladder toward the peak where reason fell away. "You were like that with him, too. Always making decisions, always in control. No wonder he..." She stopped herself, but I knew the end of that sentence. No wonder he got sick. No wonder he died. She had never said it outright, but it lived in the spaces between her other accusations. My practicality was a failure of love. My resilience was coldness. I did not weep in front of her, so I must not weep at all. "The watch is in a box," I said, my tone even. "I will give it to you tomorrow. Please go enjoy your evening." It was the wrong thing to say. The placating tone, the dismissal, it ignited her. "Enjoy my evening? How can I enjoy anything? He's gone. And you're here just asterisk functioning like nothing happened. You sold his car. You packed up his clothes. You're probably going to sell this house. You're wiping him away. And you're keeping his watch from me. What are you hoarding in that box, Mom? What else of his are you hiding?" I put the plate down on the counter. The click of ceramic on laminate was a small, definitive sound. "I am not hoarding anything. I am managing what is left. You have no idea what you are talking about." That was when she said it. The words she had been crafting in her mind for months, sharpening them on every perceived slight, every silent car ride, every bill I paid without discussion. She unleashed them with a force meant to wound. "I wish you were dead instead of Dad." Then the slam, the reverberation, the silence. In my bedroom, I did not turn on the overhead light. The street lamp outside cast a pale, orange glow through the sheer curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, on the side I still slept on. My body felt heavy. The weight was not new, but the specific ache of her words was. They found the precise fault line in my composure. I looked across the room at the closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old sweaters, was the box. A small, gray fireproof box. I had bought it at the office supply store 3 years ago when the papers began to accumulate, the medical bills, the insurance denials, the second mortgage documents. Marcus called it the life ledger. He had a way of making the grim sound noble. I had not opened it since the day I placed his watch inside, next to the ledger itself. I had promised him I would only use it as a last resort. "If she ever turns on you," he had said, his voice thin but clear in the quiet of his sick room. "If she ever forgets who did the work, show her the cost. Promise me." I had promised, and for 6 months, through her coldness and her blame, I had kept that promise locked away. I told myself her grief was a temporary storm. I told myself she would see in time. A mother's hope is a stubborn thing. It persists even when the evidence mounts against it. But now, sitting in the dim light, the echo of her wish for my death still hanging in the air of my own home, I knew the storm was not passing. It was settling in. The hope drained from me, leaving something colder and more decisive in its place. The time for protection was over. She had called me a hoarder of secrets. She was right. I stood up. My joints protested, a reminder of the long nights in a hospice chair both at work and at home. I walked to the closet. I did not need a step stool. My height was sufficient. My fingers brushed past the soft wool of the sweaters and found the cool metal edge of the box. I brought it down. It was heavier than it looked. I placed it on the bed. The lock was a simple combination, 4 digits, our wedding anniversary. I turned the dial. The clicks were loud in the quiet room. The lid released with a soft, pneumatic sigh. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stock certificates, no will. Those were in the safety deposit box at the bank. This box contained the truth of our last years. On top lay the watch, its silver face dull in the low light. Beneath it was a simple, black-bound notebook. I lifted it out. The cover was unmarked. I sat back down, the ledger on my lap. I did not open it yet. I knew what it contained. Column after column of dates, amounts, and notes. A record of a war fought in quiet rooms and hospital corridors, funded by overtime and silence. It was the answer to every one of her accusations. It was the map of a betrayal, yes, but not mine. It was the record of the betrayal she had committed against me every day for the last 6 months, in her ignorance, in her willful blindness. The anger did not come as a heat. It came as a clarity, a final, solid decision. She wanted the watch. She wanted to know what I was hiding. Very well. Tomorrow I would give her what her father left her, not the timepiece. The truth. Let her see the cost. Let her add up the columns of sacrifice and understand the currency of her disdain. My revenge would not be a shout. It would be a presentation of facts. It would be the ledger, handed over without a word of defense. I closed the box. I placed the ledger on my nightstand. I changed into my night clothes, washed my face, and brushed my teeth. The routine was grounding. When I turned out the lamp, the room was dark except for the street lamp's glow. I could see the shape of the notebook on the table. I did not cry. I planned. The words that broke the silence tonight would be met with words of a different kind tomorrow. Words written in my hand and in his. Let her read them. Let her see. I did not sleep. The ledger on the nightstand was a presence, like another person in the room. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle. The soft groan of pipes, the distant hum of the refrigerator. No sound came from down the hall. I wondered if Danielle was asleep, or if she was staring at her ceiling too, stewing in her righteous anger. My decision, formed in the cold clarity of hurt, held firm. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the window, my plan was methodical, devoid of emotion. It was a procedure. I rose at 6, as I always did. I showered, dressed in simple slacks and a blouse, and made the bed. I picked up the ledger. The black cover was cool under my fingers. I carried it to the small writing desk in the corner of the room, the one I used to pay bills. From the top drawer, I took a plain, white letter-sized envelope. I did not label it. I opened the ledger. I did not read every entry. I knew them by heart, but I needed to select the right pages. The first page was a summary in my handwriting. Life Ledger Marcus Henderson Care. For Danielle, if she needs to understand. I turned the pages. The paper rustled, a dry, serious sound. The entries were not a diary of feelings. They were a clinical record, a nurse's notes combined with an accountant's ledger. I found the first major entry from over 3 years ago. I carefully tore out a sequence of pages, ensuring the dates ran in order. I did not tear them dramatically. I bent the paper back and forth along the perforation until it gave way, a clean, straight edge. I stacked the 10 pages neatly and slid them into the envelope. They fit perfectly. I left the envelope unsealed. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, centered on the checked tablecloth. Then I began my morning routine. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. I took 2 mugs from the cupboard, the one with the chipped rim that was mine, and the one with the university logo that was hers. I measured loose tea into the infuser. The actions were automatic, grounding. The house was silent. The memory came, not as a flood, but as a specific, clear scene. It was the day we got the final, definitive diagnosis. Not the first scare, but the one that outlined the long, declining road ahead. We were in the specialist's office, a room that was too warm with generic landscape prints on the wall. Marcus held my hand. His grip was tight. When the doctor finished speaking, Marcus asked precise questions about treatment options, side effects, timelines. He sounded like a man planning a business trip. In the car, he was silent for a full 5 minutes. Then he said, "We are not telling Danielle." I looked at him. "Marcus, she's his daughter. She's an adult." "She's building her life," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. His profile was so familiar, the strong jaw now set with a new tension. "She just made partner. This will become her whole world. She'll hover. She'll pity me. I won't have her see me become a patient. Let her remember me strong." "That's a heavy secret to keep," I said. My voice was quiet. "It's a heavier burden to watch," he replied. He finally glanced at me. "You're strong enough for both. You always have been. You'll manage the care. You're a nurse. You'll manage the money. You've always managed the money. And you'll let me be her dad, her whole dad, until I can't be." It was not a request. It was a declaration of how it would be. He was mapping the battlefield, and he was placing me on the front line, alone. I felt a surge of protest, of fear. But I also saw the terror in his eyes, poorly concealed beneath the determination. His vanity was not just about looks. It was about his role, his identity as her protector. To show her his weakness was, to him, a kind of death before the fact. "And when it gets bad," I asked. "We'll tell her it's a recent complication, a sudden turn." He paused. "And Joyce, if it gets hard, if she ever turns on you through this, if she forgets who did the work," he reached over and gripped my hand again. You show her the cost. Promise me." I promised. What else could I do? I loved him. And I understood, in a way Danielle never would, the terrible weight of a father's pride. The kettle whistled, a sharp sound that severed the memory. I poured the water over the tea. The steam rose, warm and damp on my face. I heard a door open down the hall. Footsteps. They were hesitant, then firm. She was coming out. I did not turn around. I let the tea steep, watching the dark color bleed into the water. I heard her stop in the kitchen doorway. I could feel her presence, a wall of unresolved anger. The silence stretched. I counted to 10 in my head. "I'm making tea," I said, still not facing her. "Your mug is here." I heard her pull out a chair at the table, the scrape of wood on linoleum. I turned then, carrying the 2 mugs. I placed hers in front of her. I sat in my usual seat, directly across from the envelope. She looked at it, then at me. Her eyes were puffy. She had been crying. A part of me, the old part, ached to reach out. I sipped my tea. "What's that?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse. "It's what you asked for," I said. "What your father left you." Her brow furrowed. She glanced toward the hallway, toward my bedroom, thinking of the watch. "It's not the watch." "No, the watch is just a thing. This is what he actually left." I nudged the envelope an inch closer to her. "He asked me to give it to you if I ever needed to." "Needed to what?" "To make you understand." I met her gaze. My own face felt calm, like still water. You asked me what I was hiding. You accused me of hoarding his things. You were right. I was hiding this. I was hoarding the truth. Now it's yours." She stared at the envelope as if it might contain something dangerous. Her fingers, resting on the table, twitched but did not move to pick it up. "Is this some kind of guilt trip? A letter from beyond the grave?" "It is a ledger," I said, stating a fact. "A record of his illness from the beginning. The financial part is in there. The practical part, his wishes are in there." "The beginning," she echoed. "What does that mean?" "It means he was sick for 3 years, Danielle, not 6 months. The sudden turn was the final stage of a long decline. We managed it. I managed it." Her face went very still. The anger was leaching away, replaced by confusion. "That's not true. He was fine. He played golf. He came to my firm's dinner." "He played golf twice in the 3 years before he died. He was in pain both times. He went to your dinner on a high dose of corticosteroids. He slept for 2 days after." My voice was flat, reciting facts. "He did not want you to know. It was his most important request. My job was to make it possible." She looked down at the envelope. A flush was creeping up her neck. "And this ledger, what's in it?" "Open it and see." "I don't want your accounting," she said, but the defiance was weak. "It is not my accounting. It is the accounting of what happened. It is the answer to every question you've had since he died. Why I sold the car. Why I seem functional. What I was doing all those nights I was at book club." I took another sip of tea. "The proof is in your hands. You can choose to remain ignorant and go on hatting me based on the story you've built, or you can learn the story we lived." Her hand moved then, slowly. She picked up the envelope. It was not heavy. She turned it over, ran a finger under the flap, and opened it. She pulled out the stack of papers. She looked at the first page, at my heading, Life Ledger Marcus Henderson Care, for Danielle if she needs to understand. Her eyes scanned down. I knew what she was reading. The first entry was a list of initial diagnostic tests, with costs and a note. Told Danny it was a routine checkup. Marcus insisted. She did not look up. She turned to the next page, and the next. Her breathing changed. It became shallower. I finished my tea. I watched her. The morning light through the kitchen window was bright now, illuminating the dust motes in the air, the familiar cracks in the sugar bowl. It was an ordinary morning. The world outside continued. In here, the world she knew was ending, one line item at a time. My revenge was quiet. It was the sound of pages turning. She read. The kitchen was silent except for the soft sound of paper. The morning sun climbed higher, cutting across the table and lighting the pages in her hands. I watched her face. I saw the initial confusion harden into focused concentration. Then I saw the first flicker of something else, doubt, perhaps, or the first crack in her certainty. Her eyes moved down the columns. I knew the entries by their order. The first few pages were mostly financial. Dates, provider names, amounts paid, amounts denied by insurance, notes on payment sources. "Second mortgage initiated," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a realization spoken into the quiet. She looked up at me. "You took out a second mortgage." "Yes," I said. "When?" 3 years and 2 months ago. The equity line was exhausted 6 months before that. She looked back at the page. Her finger traced a line. "This says the payment was $2,300 a month." She did the math quickly. I saw her mind working. "For over 3 years." "Yes." "And this, source, Joyce's retirement fund withdrawal, penalty incurred." Her voice had lost all its previous heat. It was flat, stunned. "The penalty was 12%, I said. It was still the most accessible cash at the time. She was silent for a full minute, turning pages. Each entry was a brick, building a wall between her perception and the reality. "August 5th, she read. "Overnight shift at hospice to cover in-home nurse for weekend. Told Danny I was at a book club." She looked up. "You were." "No, I was working a double. The in-home nurse cost $40 an hour. We needed weekend coverage so I could sleep and go to my regular job on Monday." "You told me you joined a mystery book club." The detail was so specific, so mundane. It was the lie that made it real for her. "I did. I read the books on my breaks. It gave me something plausible to talk about with you. She turned another page. November. Sold mother's pearl necklace. Listed for $850, accepted $7, applied to pharmacy bill. Her eyes met mine. Grandma's pearls. They were just things, Danielle. They paid for a month of his anti-nausea medication. The pills that let him keep food down when you came for Sunday dinner and remarked on how good his appetite was. A muscle in her jaw tightened. She looked back down, her reading becoming more frantic. She was no longer processing each entry individually. She was absorbing the scale. The ledger was not a story of dramatic, singular sacrifices. It was a story of relentless, grinding erosion. The slow dissolution of safety nets, of future plans, of small comforts. December. Canceled homeowner's insurance premium payment plan to free up cash flow. Risk accepted. She shook her head. You risked the house. I calculated the risk. The likelihood of a major claim in that period was low. The certainty of needing to pay for his infusion therapy was 100%. And this, Danny's birthday, transferred $200 from her gift fund to copay account, will make up later. She put the page down. Her hands were trembling slightly. You took money from my birthday fund. It was a fund in a spreadsheet, Danielle, not a physical envelope. It was money I had set aside. I used it. I did not make it up later. There was no later for that kind of thing. She leaned back in her chair as if pushed. The color had drained from her face. She stared at the pages spread before her, not seeing them. She was seeing the last 3 years reordered. Our interactions, my absences, my tiredness, the things we didn't do, the things we didn't buy, all of it was being reframed by this stark arithmetic. All this time, she said, her voice hollow. I thought we were okay. I thought you were just being frugal, old-fashioned. We were not okay. We were managing a catastrophe. You were living in the version of our life we constructed for you. Why? The word burst from her, not angry, but pained. Why go this far? Why not tell me? I could have helped. I make good money. I could have paid things. It was not about the money, I said, though that was only partly true. It was about his terms. His condition for fighting was that you not see the fight. He believed your view of him was a source of his strength. To see your pity or your fear would have broken him faster than the disease. My job was to preserve that for him, at any cost. So you bankrupted yourself. You worked nights. You sold your mother's jewelry. You risked your house. She stated it as a list of facts, but I could hear the dawning horror in her tone, the horror of comprehension. I upheld my promise, I said simply. She picked up the pages again, her eyes scanning now for a different kind of entry. The financial ledger was one thing. It was shocking, but it was numbers. She was looking for the man behind the numbers. She found it a few pages in. The entries shifted. Less dollar amounts, more observations. In my clinical nurse's hand, I had recorded his state. March 14, severe pain breakthrough at 3 a.m. Did not call hospice nurse, managed with oral meds. He cried, said he didn't want Danny to see him like this, made me promise again. April 2, helped him shave, hands too weak. He was angry, refused to let Danny visit this weekend, said he had a bug. May 18, practiced walking for Danny's graduation party. Lasted 10 minutes, needed 2 hours rest after. He said it was worth it to see her proud face. Danielle's breath hitched. She read that one twice, her graduation from the leadership program. He had been vibrant that day, she'd said later, the life of the party. It was an act, she asked, though she already knew. It was a performance, one he rehearsed for. She kept reading. The entries were unsparing. His vanity, his fear, his specific, repeated instructions to me. Keep her away this week, I look too yellow. Tell her I'm golfing. Tell her I'm at the hardware store. Tell her anything. The hero she had mourned was being dismantled, line by line. Not by my criticism, but by his own words and actions, recorded faithfully. The strong, invulnerable father was a carefully maintained illusion. The real man was frail, scared, and deeply concerned with his daughter's perception. She reached the last page I had given her. It was an entry from about a year before he died. Today he asked if I resented him. I said no. He said, "You should. I've asked you to be the villain in her story so I can stay the hero." I told him there were no villains here, only love that takes different shapes. He held my hand and didn't speak for a long time. Danielle put the page down. She did not look at me. She looked at her hands, now clasped tightly in her lap. The sunlight was bright on the empty mug, on the checked tablecloth, on the devastatingly ordinary morning. The silence in the kitchen was no longer charged with anger. It was thick with the weight of a truth too large to immediately hold. She finally spoke, her voice small and fractured. "There's more, isn't there, in the book?" "Yes," I said, "there is more." She nodded slowly. She gathered the pages, her movements careful as if they were fragile. She slid them back into the envelope. She did not hand it back to me. She kept it, holding it in both hands on her lap. "I need to go," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I need to think." "All right," I said. She stood up, the chair legs scraping again. She walked out of the kitchen. I heard her go down the hall, not to her room, but to the front door. A moment later, I heard the door open and close softly. She had taken the envelope with her. I remained at the table. I finished my cold tea. The revenge was in motion now. It was no longer mine to control. It was in her hands, in her mind, working its way through the fortress of her grief and blame. I had shown her the cost. Now she had to live with the price of knowing. She did not come back that day. I cleaned the kitchen. I washed the 2 mugs. I went to the grocery store because we were low on milk and eggs. The normalcy of the tasks was a relief. It was a space where I did not have to think about the envelope, or her face, or the quiet demolition that was taking place in her mind. I knew what the ledger contained. I had lived it. Now she was living it in retrospect, and that was a different kind of pain. She returned in the early evening. I heard her key in the lock, the careful click of the door closing. She did not call out. I was in the living room, mending a tear in a pillowcase. The needle was small in my fingers, the thread a pale blue. She appeared in the doorway. She still held the envelope, now bent and worn from being carried. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was not crying now. She looked exhausted, hollowed out. "You're back," I said, not looking up from my stitch. "I went to the office," she said. Her voice was rough, unused. "I couldn't be here, I couldn't be anywhere, so I went to my office and I read it, all of it, the pages you gave me, and then I went back and got the rest of the book." I pulled the thread taut, the tear closed neatly. "I see." "Why?" The word was not a burst this time. It was a low, sustained note of anguish. "Why did you write it all down like that? Like a report?" I set the pillowcase aside. I looked at her. "For 2 reasons. First, because I am a nurse. Documentation is what you do. You track symptoms, medications, interventions. It keeps you focused. It makes the unbearable manageable. Second, because your father asked me to. He said, keep the record. So if she ever needs to know, she can see it wasn't a story. It was a fact." She stepped into the room but did not sit. She stood by the armchair, her hand gripping its back. "The things in here, Mom, the second mortgage, the retirement fund. You sold your car a year before he died. You wrote, proceeds to cover deductible. Told Danny it was giving me trouble." "It was giving me trouble," I said. "The trouble was it was an asset we could convert to cash." She shook her head, not in denial, but in overwhelmed disbelief. "You took extra night shifts at the hospice. You wrote down your hours, the dates. You were working 60, 70 hours a week." "I was. My salary and his disability were not enough. The insurance had lifetime caps. We hit them." "And you never said a word." She was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. "All those times I talked about my cases, my stress, my bonuses, you just listened. You were living your life. That was the point. But you were drowning." The words came out louder, strained. "Right in front of me, and I was complaining about client dinners. You didn't know. You weren't supposed to know." She looked down at the envelope, then back at me. "This entry from last year. Danny called upset about work, talked for an hour. Did not mention Marcus fell this morning. Bruised hip. Pain meds increased." Her eyes glistened. "I remember that call. I was crying about a lost motion. You were so calm, you gave me advice." "You needed advice. My job was to give it." "Your job," she repeated, and the phrase seemed to bitter on her tongue. "Was that all it was? A job?" No, I said, my voice firm for the first time. It was a promise. It was love. Love for him to honor his wish, and love for you to protect your world for as long as possible. They were the same thing. She was silent, absorbing that. The equation was not computing for her. In her mind, love was attention, presence, shared burden. My love had been silence, absence, and solitary burden-bearing. They were incompatible languages. He didn't want me to know he fell, she said, almost to herself. He was mortified, he said. Don't tell Danny, she'll think I'm an old man. He was 54. She let out a breath that was half a sob, quickly stifled. All those times he canceled plans, he was too tired or in pain. Yes. And the times he did come, it took everything he had. Yes. She finally sank into the armchair. She placed the envelope on the coffee table between us like an exhibit. The money, it's one thing. I don't know, process the money. It's numbers. But this, she tapped the envelope. The lying, the constant daily lying to me for years by both of you. It was not lying to harm you. It was preserving a truth for you. What truth? That he was perfect, that he was strong, that's not truth. That's a fairy tale. It was the truth he wanted you to have. He believed it was his last gift to you, a clean memory, a father who was whole. And what about you? Her gaze was direct now, accusing in a new way. What was your gift? You got the falls, the bruises, the bills, the night shifts. You got to be the one who saw him fade. And then you got to be the one I blamed for it. Where was your clean memory? The question hung in the air. It was the core of it. The unfairness so profound it had calcified into my resolve. My memory is different, I said, my voice low. It is not clean. It is full of difficult things, but it is also real. It is him holding my hand when he was too weak to speak. It is him trusting me with his fear. It is the man he actually was, not the icon he wanted to be. I do not regret that memory, but I will not let you punish me for holding it alone. She looked away, out the window at the darkening street. The living room lamps cast a soft glow. The family photos on the walls smiled their frozen smiles. A lie, every one of them from her new perspective. I said I wished you were dead, she whispered. I heard you. I didn't mean it. You meant it in the moment. The moment was built on a story you believed. Now you have a different story. What you mean now may be different. She brought her hands to her face, pressing her fingers against her eyes. I don't know what to do with this, with any of it. There is nothing to do, I said. There is only to know. The ledger is not an instruction manual. It is an autopsy. Of the last 3 years, you asked what I was hiding. Now you know. And what happens now? She dropped her hands. She looked lost, younger than her 28 years. That is up to you, I said. I picked up the pillowcase again. The mundane action was a punctuation mark. The revelation was complete. The consequences were hers to navigate. My part, the showing, was done. The cold, precise work of my revenge had reached its target. The rest was fallout. The silence that followed my statement stretched through the evening. Danielle did not leave the chair. She sat, the ledger pages now scattered on her lap, not reading, just staring into the middle distance. I finished mending the pillowcase. I folded it and placed it in the linen closet. I made a simple dinner for myself, soup and toast. I offered her some. She shook her head. The house was a museum of our new reality. Later, when I came back to the living room with a glass of water, she spoke without looking at me. Her voice was detached, analytical, as if trying to solve a complex problem. He specifically asked you to hide his falls, his weakness, his pain levels. Yes. And he gave you reasons, each time. Not always. Sometimes it was just a look, a shake of his head when you were on the phone. I understood. She picked up a page. This entry, the one from after my promotion party, he was in bed for 2 days after. You wrote that he said, it was worth it to see her face, but don't tell her the price. She finally looked at me. He called me her, like I was a separate project, not a participant. You were the audience, I said. He saw your belief in him as the final good thing he could give you. He was protecting that. He was protecting his own image, she countered, and there was a sharpness returning, but it was aimed in a new direction. They were the same thing to him, I said. I sat in the chair opposite her. Your father was a proud man. There is no separating the two. He wanted your memory of him to be strong because he believed that strength was what you needed from him. His vulnerability was a gift he gave only to me, a burden he gave only to me. That was the division of labor. She absorbed this, her eyes scanning the page again. He asked you to lie about the golf, about the hardware store, about having a cold. She let out a short, humorless breath. It's so small, so vain. It was human, I said. He was facing the loss of everything. His strength, his role, his future. Clinging to the small dignities was all he had left. My role was to defend those dignities, even from you. The word even hung in the air, especially from you. You make it sound noble, she said, her voice tightening. It feels cowardly. He let me live in a fantasy. He let me attack you for living in the reality. How is that fair? How is that love? I did not say it was fair, I replied. My own composure felt like a thin shell, but I held it. I said it was his wish, and I chose to honor it. You are asking the wrong question. The question is not whether it was fair to you. The question is whether you can understand why I did it. She was silent for a long time. The darkness outside the window was complete now. I need to see the rest, she said finally. The whole book, not just the pages you picked. I nodded. I went to my room and retrieved the black ledger from my nightstand. I brought it back and handed it to her. It was heavier than the envelope, containing the full, unedited record. She took it, her hands settling around its weight as if accepting a responsibility. She opened it to the beginning, to entries older than the ones I had selected. She read in silence. I did not leave. I sat and waited. This was part of it, the witness. She read about the first diagnosis, the stunned quiet in the car afterward, his immediate decree of secrecy. She read about the early treatments, the side effects he hid, the excuses he crafted. She read his direct quotes, which I had recorded verbatim. Joyce, if she sees me lose my hair, it's over. She'll see a sick man. I'm not a sick man. I'm a man who is fighting. Tell her the fatigue is from work, always from work. I don't want her in this hospital room. This is not a place for daughters. This is a place for wives. Danielle flinched at that one. She looked up. He said that. He did. And you agreed. I understood his meaning. He did not want you in the trenches. He wanted you on the parade ground, cheering. I was already in the trenches. It was where I belonged. She returned to the book. The entries became more frequent, more detailed as the disease progressed. His fears were laid bare, not to her, but to the page, through my pen. He asked me today if I thought he was less of a man. I told him no. He did not believe me. Cried tonight from pain, said, "This is not how a father should be." Expressed worry that Danny would remember him as weak. Made me promise again to control the narrative after. The hero of her stories, the man of unflappable strength and good humor, was being systematically unmade. Not by my criticism, but by his own admissions and directives. The curtain was pulled back, and the man operating the levers was scared, vain, and fiercely protective of a legacy that required my erasure. She reached the final months. The entries were shorter, more brutal. The performance was too hard to maintain. The lies narrowed to the essential ones. Stopped all non-family visits. Told Danny he's contagious. In truth, can no longer sit up for more than an hour. He whispered, "Is she okay?" Meaning Danny. I said she was thriving. He smiled. That was the point. The last entry was dated the day before he died. It was not in my handwriting. It was in his, a shaky, scrawled version of his former confident script. She stared at it, her body going very still. I knew what it said. I had not included it in the first pages. It was the final piece. Joyce, if she ever turns on you, show her this book. Show her the man I really was, the scared one, the vain one, the one who loved her so much it made him a coward, and show her the woman who loved him enough to be his accomplice. She deserves the truth, even if it breaks her image of me. Better she have a broken image than a broken heart toward you. I am sorry for the weight. You carried it all. Marcus. Danielle's shoulders began to shake. A low, choked sound escaped her. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. The ledger sat open on her lap, his final confession staring up from the page. The idol was not just shattered, it had willingly dismantled itself and named its own flaws. And it had named me not as the villain but as the accomplice, the bearer of the weight. She closed the book gently. She held it against her chest, her head bowed. The tears came then, silent and steady. They were not the angry tears from before. They were the tears of disillusionment, of seeing the hero unmade and seeing, for the first time, the intricate machinery of love and lies that had propped him up. I did not go to her. I did not offer comfort. This grief was hers alone. It was the necessary demolition. My revenge was complete in this moment. She had seen the man behind the curtain. She had read his own words. The father she had worshipped and missed was a construction. The father who existed was more human, more flawed, and had, in the end, asked her to see me. She finally lifted her head. Her face was wet, her eyes raw. She looked at the book in her hands, then at me. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew I would blame you." "He predicted it," I corrected softly. "He hoped he was wrong." But he was. It was a statement of fact, heavy with shame. "No," I said, "he was." She held the ledger against her chest for a long time, the tears slowing to a stop. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The confrontation I had anticipated, the shouting, the denial, had dissolved into this, a stunned, wet silence. The weapon I had handed her had turned in her grasp, and now she was surveying the damage it had done to her own world. Finally, she lowered the book. She placed it carefully on the coffee table, aligning its edges with the table's corner. She wiped her face with the heels of her hands, a rough, childlike gesture. When she looked at me, her eyes were red, but clear. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was not an accusation. It was a plea for understanding. The anger was gone, burned away by the heat of the truth. What remained was a raw, humiliated confusion. "I told you," I said, my voice even. "I promised him." "But after," she said, her words coming faster. "After he died, when I said those things, why didn't you show me this then? Why did you let me hate you for 6 months?" I considered the question. The simple answer was the promise, but there was more. "At first, I told myself it was your grief, that you needed a target and I was the safe one. I thought time would soften it, that you would see me again, not as the enemy, but as your mother. I was waiting for that. And when it didn't soften, when you wished me dead," I said, the words factual, devoid of dramatics, "I understood that time was not the cure. Ignorance was the disease. You were operating with faulty data. The only cure was to provide the correct data." "So this was a clinical decision," she said, a flicker of the old sharpness returning. "It was a necessary one. You asked what I was hiding. I showed you. You blamed me for things you did not understand. I provided the understanding." She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her head in her hands. "All those times I talked about him, how great he was, how much I missed him, you just sat there and listened." "I did." "Did you hate me for it?" "No," I said. "I pitied you, and I was angry, but I did not hate you. You were mourning a phantom. It was a real grief, but it was for a man who never fully existed. My grief was for the man who did. They were different experiences. Yours was louder, mine was heavier." She lifted her head. "Why did you let him do it? Why did you agree to this charade? You're a strong person. You could have said no. You could have told me the truth from the start." This was the core of it, the question of my complicity. What would that have accomplished? I asked, not defensively, but genuinely. If I had defied him, it would have broken his spirit. It would have introduced conflict and guilt into his final years. He would have seen himself as a burden to you, not just to me. He would have retreated from you entirely. My choice was to uphold his wish and keep you in his light, or defy him and cast you both into a shadow. I chose the light for you. The shadow for me. And you think that was the right choice? Her voice was strained. It was the choice I made. It was the choice he asked of me. Right or wrong is not a useful measure. It is the choice that allowed him to face his death with a measure of dignity, as he defined it. It is the choice that allowed you to have 3 more years of a father you believed was invincible. And it is the choice that left you hating me. I accepted that possible outcome when I made the promise. She stood up abruptly, packing the short length of the living room. She stopped in front of the bookshelf, looking at the photos. Our wedding photo, her graduation, a beach trip from 10 years ago. "Everything here is a lie," she said, but softly. "No, the love was not a lie. The moments were real. The context was edited. There is a difference." She turned to face me. "You sound like a philosopher. You sound detached." "I am explaining, Danielle. You asked for reasons. These are the reasons. Detachment is how I survived. If I had felt every cut of every lie, every night of exhausted work, every bill that meant another piece of our security vanished, I would have collapsed. So I detached. I became a manager of the crisis. My feelings were a luxury the operation could not afford." She walked back to the chair but did not sit. She stood over me. "And what about your feelings now? Now that I know, what are they?" I looked up at her, my daughter, tall and sharp, and finally seeing the wreckage. "My primary feeling is fatigue. The fatigue of carrying a secret for years and then of revealing it. My secondary feeling is resolve. The resolve to not apologize for what I did. I will not say I am sorry for keeping his secret. I am sorry it hurt you. But I am not sorry I kept my word." She blinked, absorbing the distinction. "You're not sorry." "For honoring my husband's final, coherent wish? No, I am not. I am sorry you are in pain. But the pain comes from the reality of the situation, not from my concealment of it. The disease caused the pain. We just organized its presentation." She let out a shuddering breath. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who he was. I feel like I've been living in a house where the walls were painted to look like sky, and you just pulled them down to show the concrete behind it." "The concrete is what was always there," I said. "The sky was the gift he painted for you. My job was to hold up the walls." She sank back into the chair, the fight gone out of her. The confrontation had not been a battle. It had been an excavation. And she was standing in the hole, looking at the foundations of our family, which were more complex and less pretty than she had ever imagined. "What do I do now?" she asked again, the lost child in her voice more pronounced. "You live with the information," I said. "You reconcile the father you knew with the man in the ledger. You decide what you think of me now that you know the full scope of the work. You rebuild your understanding from the ground up. There is no shortcut." "And you," she asked, "what will you do?" "I will continue," I said. "I have been continuing. The debt is not gone, the fatigue is not gone, but the secret is. That is a change. It remains to be seen if it is a relief." We sat in the quiet living room. The ledger on the table was just a book now. Its power was spent. It had transferred its contents into her mind, where they would now reside, shifting and settling, altering her forever. My revenge was not a moment of triumph. It was the long, silent aftermath of a truth told. The air between us was clear, but it was also cold, scoured clean of the comforting illusions that had warmed it before. We would have to learn to breathe in this new, thinner atmosphere. The quiet in the room was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a field after the battle, littered with the debris of exploded truths. Danielle's question hung there, unanswered in any real way. "What will you do?" I had given her a factual response, but I saw in her eyes that the facts were not enough. She needed to see the machinery. Not just the ledger's entries, but the human engine that had powered them. I stood up. My knees protested, a chronic reminder of those years of constant motion. "I will make more tea," I said. It was not an evasion. It was the creation of a space. The kitchen was a stage for the ordinary. What I needed to say belonged there, amid the mugs and the ticking clock. She followed me. She did not sit at the table this time. She leaned against the counter, watching me fill the kettle, light the burner. The routine was a familiar script. I needed it. "You asked why I let him do it," I began, my back to her. "The question assumes I had a choice that felt like a choice. It did not. It was a series of small surrenders, each one logical at the time." I turned around, facing her. The fluorescent light overhead was unforgiving. It showed every line on my face, lines she had never bothered to read before. The first surrender was to his fear. His terror was not of death, but of irrelevance, of becoming the sick father. To oppose that fear would have been cruel, so I surrendered. I became the keeper of the lie. The kettle began its low hum. The second surrender was to the practical war. You read the numbers, but numbers are abstract. Let me make them concrete. For 3 years, my life was a calendar of medical appointments I drove him to, pretending I was going to work early. It was a rotation of medications I organized in a pillbox you never saw. It was learning to give injections, to change dressings, to monitor fluid intake. It was knowing the exact sound of his pain-filled breath in the dark, and the exact lie to tell you the next morning about his restful sleep. I took 2 mugs down. The third surrender was to isolation. We could not have friends over in case they saw. I distanced myself from my sister because she would have known. I became a poor correspondent, a flaky friend. People thought I was consumed by my job at the hospice. I was, but not the way they thought. My social world shrank to the size of this house, and then to the size of his sick room. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over the tea bags, watching the brown swirl. The fourth surrender was financial. You saw the second mortgage, but it was also the constant calculus. Do I pay the pharmacy bill or the electric bill? Which can be late? Do I sell my mother's pearls or my wedding ring? The ring had more sentimental value, but the pearls fetched a better price. So I sold the pearls. I told myself it was just metal and stones. It was a lie. It was a piece of my history. But in the calculus of survival, sentiment has a low numeric value. I pushed her mug toward her. She did not pick it up. The fifth and largest surrender was to your perception of me. I knew what it looked like. The brisk, efficient nurse. The unsentimental wife. The woman who handled everything. I knew you saw coldness where there was exhaustion. I knew you saw control where there was desperation. I surrendered my right to appear fragile or needy or grieving in advance, because if I showed any crack, the entire facade might have fallen on you. My job was to be the wall. Walls do not weep. I finally sat at the table. My body felt heavy, as if finally setting down the load it had carried for years. You called it a charade. It was not a charade. It was a war. A silent daily war fought with pills and bank transfers and manufactured smiles. The enemy was the disease. The battlefield was this house. The civilian was you. My mission was to keep the civilian safe from the sight of the blood and the mud. Your father was my fellow soldier, but he was also a priority to protect. So I fought the war on 2 fronts, against his illness and for his peace of mind. Danielle was crying again, but silently. Tears just welled and fell. She made no move to wipe them away. You asked about my feelings, I continued, my voice lower now. During the war, my primary feeling was focus. After, it was a hollowed-out stillness. And when you turned your grief into weapons against me, the feeling was a kind of cold fury, not at you, but at the grotesque unfairness of it. I had spent my emotional capital on the fight. I had none left to defend myself from the friendly fire. I took a sip of my tea. It was hot, bitter. My revenge, Danielle, was not to hurt you. It was to stop the bleeding. The ledger was my proof of combat. I showed you my service record. I showed you the wounds. I showed you the orders I was following. This is not a story of a villain and a hero. It is a story of a single soldier in a trench, doing her duty as defined by her commanding officer, who she loved, and then being court-martialed by the very person she was ordered to protect. She slid into the chair opposite me. Her tears had stopped. Her face was pale, serious. You never talked about it to anyone. Who would I have talked to? It would have violated the mission. The mission was secrecy. Talking would have been a betrayal. Of him and of the version of you he wanted to preserve. That's a lonely way to live, she whispered. It was, I agreed. But loneliness was a tool. It kept the secret safe. It compartmentalized the pain. It allowed me to function. We sat for a moment in the kitchen light. The explanation was done. The unseen war had been mapped for her, its campaigns and casualties laid bare. There were no more secrets in the room, just 2 women and the wreckage of a shared history, now viewed from opposite sides of the battlefield. I accused you of erasing him, she said, but you were preserving him in a specific way, a way that erased you instead. It was not an even trade, I said, but it was the trade he asked for, and I agreed to it. And you don't regret it. I thought about the question. I thought about Marcus's hand in mine, the look of relief in his eyes when I would tell him, she's fine. She had a good day. I thought about the silent rides to chemo, the quiet solidarity of those hours. I regret the cost to you and me, I said carefully. I regret that our relationship became a casualty. I do not regret giving him the death he wanted. I do not regret sparing him the humiliation he feared. Those regrets would be regrets of love, and I will not regret loving him, even in the way he needed. She nodded slowly, as if absorbing a difficult lesson. The anger, the blame, the idealized father, all of it had been stripped away. What remained was the complex, painful, unadorned truth. My revenge was complete. I had told the story. The soldier had filed her after-action report. The court-martial was over. Now we were just two survivors, looking at the same scorched earth, trying to decide if anything could grow from it. The tea in our mugs grew cold. The kitchen held the silence that follows a long confession. Danielle did not speak for several minutes. She stared into the dark liquid, her face a mask of concentration. I could see her mind working, not on emotions now, but on logistics. It was a shift I recognized. When the emotional wave is too large, you focus on the debris it has left behind. You start picking up pieces because that is something you can do. She finally looked up. Her eyes were clear, direct. "The second mortgage," she said. "What's the current balance?" The question was so practical, so abrupt, it almost startled me. But I understood. This was her first step onto solid ground. A number, a fact, something to grasp. "Approximately $54,000, I said. "The payments are current, but they are a significant portion of my monthly income." "And the retirement fund you pulled from?" "It's depleted. The penalty and the withdrawals over 3 years emptied it." "Other debts, medical bills not covered?" "There is a final hospital bill, $8,000. It's in collections. I've been paying it down slowly." She nodded, absorbing the figures. She pushed her mug aside and leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Give me the statements. The mortgage, the bill, all of it." "Why?" "Because I'm going to help you pay them off." Her voice held no grand emotion. It was a statement of intent, flat and firm. "That is not necessary," I said. "It is to me." She met my gaze. "You said I was the civilian, fine, but the war is over. The civilian can help with the reconstruction. It's the only thing I can think to do." I saw in her face that this was not about generosity. It was about penance, about transforming her overwhelming guilt into a column of numbers she could attack. It was her version of my ledger, a new ledger, one of repayment. "I did not show you the ledger to make you pay a debt," I said. "I know that. You showed it to me to make me see the debt. I see it. Now I need to address it. It's a practical problem. Let me be practical." I considered her. The entitled anger was gone. In its place was a grim determination. She needed a task. This was a task she understood. Money, plans, solutions. It was the language of her world. "All right," I said. I stood and went to the small desk in my bedroom. I returned with a folder. Inside were the most recent mortgage statement, the collection notice for the hospital, and a summary I kept of the other outstanding smaller bills. I placed it on the table in front of her. She opened the folder. She did not flinch at the numbers. She studied them, her lawyer's mind engaging. "The interest rate on this mortgage is high. We could look at refinancing, but your income alone might not qualify." She glanced at me. "My income would. We could refinance together, get a lower rate. My monthly contribution would cover more of the principal." "That is a significant commitment," I said. "It's 3 years of payments. You made a 3-year commitment alone. I can make one with you." She said it not as a boast, but as a simple comparison of terms. She pulled her laptop from her bag, which was by the door. She brought it to the table and opened it. The blue glow lit her face. She began typing, pulling up her banking information, a calculator, a notepad app. The kitchen became her office. "I'll take over the hospital bill first," she said, more to herself than to me. "It's in collections, so it's damaging your credit. A lump sum payment from me will clear it. Then we address the mortgage." I watched her. This was her apology, not in words, which had failed her, but in action. It was the most sincere form she could muster. She was quantifying her remorse and setting up a payment plan. "Danielle," I said. She looked up from the screen. "This does not erase what was said, what was done." "I know that," she said quickly, her eyes dropping back to the numbers. "This isn't about erasing. It's about building something new, a new set of facts. I can't change the old ones. I can only add new ones on top. She was right. It was a new ledger. Her columns would be payments made, interest saved, debts cleared. They would sit alongside my columns of sacrifices made, shifts worked, secrets kept. They would not cancel each other out. They would simply coexist, a dual accounting of our family's cost. "Thank you," I said. The words were inadequate, but they were the correct ones for the moment. She nodded, a sharp little movement. "I'll need your account information for the mortgage company to set up the refinance application." I gave it to her. She typed it in. The sound of her keystrokes was a new sound in the kitchen. It was the sound of engagement, of participation. For the first time in 3 years, she was not the protected civilian. She was entering the trenches, not to fight the disease, but to deal with its aftermath. It was a different war, but it was ours together. After an hour, she closed her laptop. "I've set up a transfer for the hospital bill. It will process tomorrow. I've also started the application for refinancing. They'll need your signature. I'll email you the documents." "All right." She looked around the kitchen, as if seeing it for the first time since the conversation began. "I should go to bed," she said, but she made no move to leave. "Yes." She stood, collecting her laptop and the folder of statements. She paused at the doorway. "Mom." "Yes." "When you said you were tired, I understand now. I really do. It wasn't an 'I'm sorry.' It was an 'I see you.' In that moment, it was perhaps more valuable." "I know," I said. She left for her room. I stayed at the table. The revenge was complete, and it had yielded an unexpected result. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a partnership. A sober, clear-eyed alliance based on the unadorned truth of our situation. She was no longer fighting me. She was fighting the remnants of the war I had fought alone. It was not the reconciliation I might have once dreamed of. It was something harder, more real, and potentially more durable. It was a shared debt. And for the first time, the weight was not only on my shoulders. The practical work began the next morning. Danielle came into the kitchen dressed for her office, but she carried the ledger with her. She placed it on the table next to her toast. She did not open it immediately. She ate, and I drank my coffee. The silence was different. It was not hostile or heavy. It was observational, like two scientists assessing the same data set. "I was thinking about the entry from October 2 years ago," she said, not looking up from her plate. "The one where you took a personal day from the hospice to take him to a specialist, but you told me you were helping a friend move." "I remember," I said. "Who was the friend?" "There was no friend. It was a cover story. The specialist was in another city. It was an all-day trip." She nodded, as if confirming a hypothesis. "And the time you said you were at a weekend nursing conference." "I was working back-to-back shifts to cover a private duty nurse for him. The conference was a plausible reason for my absence." "Right." She took a bite of toast, chewed thoughtfully. "It's the detail that gets me, the specificity of the lies. You had to have a ready answer for everything. You had to keep the stories straight." "It was part of the work," I said. "Administration." She pushed her plate away and opened the ledger. She didn't flip through it randomly. She went to a specific page, one she had marked with a scrap of paper. "This entry: sold the antique dresser from the guest room, $400, applied to medical supply order." She looked at me. "That was Grandma's dresser." It was. It was also a piece of furniture we rarely used. The medical supplies were oxygen tanks. We needed them. "I loved that dresser," she said, but her tone wasn't accusatory. It was reflective. "I used to play with the little carved flowers on the drawers when I was a kid. I asked about it once. You said it was in storage because it needed refinishing." That was the story. She closed the book. Every object that disappeared had a story, a boring, practical story, and I believed the interesting ones. She looked around the kitchen, her eyes tracing the spaces where things were not, the gaps I had learned not to see. "You weren't erasing him. You were funding him, with everything we had." I did not respond. She was working it out for herself, connecting the ledger's entries to the physical world of our home, to the memories of her own past 3 years. Each connection was a small, painful adjustment of her reality. She went to work. I went about my day, laundry, a trip to the post office, paying the remaining utility bills. When she returned that evening, she went straight to her room. I heard the faint sound of her keyboard. She was likely working on the refinancing documents. An hour later, she came out and found me in the living room, reading. She stood in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "During all of it, when you were at your most tired, or when a bill came that you couldn't see a way to pay, what did you think about? To keep going?" I set my book down. It was an intimate question. It went to the core of the machinery. "I thought about the end point," I said. "Not his death. The moment after, I thought about the moment when I could finally stop. When the phone would not ring with a medical question. When the calendar would not be a grid of appointments. When I could sit in a chair and not have a list of 10 urgent things in my head. I thought about silence and stillness. They were my landmarks. And now that you have them." "Now I have them. They are different than I imagined. They are filled with the echoes of the noise, but they are mine." She nodded slowly. She came into the room and sat in the chair opposite me. The ledger was on the side table. She glanced at it. "He left me the watch," she said. "And you, he left me you." I waited. "The watch is a thing. It's a symbol of the man he pretended to be. The strong, timeless one. But you are the record of the man he actually was. And you are the person who made his pretense possible." She met my eyes. Her expression was serious, stripped of all its former certainty. "That's the real inheritance, isn't it? Not the symbol, the truth, and the person who held it." "The truth is your inheritance," I confirmed. "It is a difficult one. But it's real. The watch is just a story. This," she gestured to the ledger, to me, to the room, "is the fact. He didn't leave me money. He didn't leave me property. He left me a debt and a mother who went into debt to protect me from knowing about it. That's what I actually received." She stood up and walked to the bookshelf. She took down the wedding photo, looked at it for a moment, and put it back. "I've been thinking about legacy all wrong. I thought it was about what you leave behind. Objects, memories, but it's not. It's about what you instill in the people who are left. He instilled in me an image. You instilled in me nothing, because you were too busy upholding his image to build your own. But now, by showing me this, you've instilled the truth. That's a harder thing, a better thing." She returned to her chair. "I don't know how to be a daughter to you yet. The old way is broken. I based it on a fiction. I need to learn a new way, based on the fact of who you are, what you did." "That will take time," I said. "I know, but I have the foundation now. The real one, not the painted sky, the concrete." She used my own word back to me. It was an acknowledgement that she had heard me, truly heard me, the night before. The epiphany was not dramatic. It was a quiet realignment. She saw the ledger not as a weapon I had used, but as the blueprint of the structure she had been living in. She saw me not as the demolisher of her father, but as the architect and builder of the world he wanted for her. The inheritance was not the illusion, but the labor behind it. "I will need to return to the city tomorrow," she said. "I have work, but I'll be back this weekend. We can sign the refinancing papers then, and maybe we can have dinner without talking about bills or ledgers." "That would be acceptable," I said. A faint, tentative smile touched her lips. It was the first one I had seen in months that was not bitter or sarcastic. It was just a smile, small and real. She went to bed. I stayed up for a while longer. The revenge was complete, and it had yielded this, not a restored fantasy, but a shared acknowledgement of the difficult, unadorned truth. She was not the daughter I had before. She was a woman who had seen the cost and was now, haltingly, trying to calculate her share of it. My legacy, as she called it, was not comfort or warmth. It was grit. It was the unvarnished record. And it was, finally, enough. She returned on Saturday afternoon, as she said she would. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off. A moment later, the front door opened. She carried a small overnight bag and a folder. "The documents are ready," she said, placing the folder on the entryway table. Her tone was matter-of-fact. It was a transaction, but not a cold one. It was a task we would complete together. "Would you like some lunch first?" I asked. "Yes, please." We ate sandwiches at the kitchen table. We did not discuss the ledger. We did not discuss her father. We talked about the traffic coming out of the city, a movie she had seen, the neighbor's new dog. The conversation was simple, surface level. It was not avoidance. It was a mutual agreement to inhabit the ordinary for a while. The extraordinary had exhausted us. After lunch, we sat at the table with the documents. She explained each page, the new loan terms, the lower interest rate, the projected payment schedule where her name was listed alongside mine. I read them carefully. The numbers were clear. The commitment was concrete. I signed where she indicated. She signed after me. She gathered the papers, placed them in a pre-addressed envelope, and sealed it. "I'll mail this on my way back tomorrow," she said. That was it. The practical reconstruction had its first beam in place. The afternoon passed quietly. She went to her room to take a work call. I worked in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds. The physical labor was satisfying. The roots came up with a soft tear. When I came inside, she was in the living room, the ledger on her lap again. She was not reading it intently. She was holding it, her fingers resting on the cover. "I was thinking," she said, not looking up. "I would like to have a copy of this, of the whole thing." "Why?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. "For the record, my record. I don't want to forget what it contains." "You can take the original," I said. "My job as its keeper is finished." She considered this, then shook her head. "No, you should keep the original. It belongs in the box. I'll make a digital copy for reference." She said reference like a historian, not a daughter. It was the right word. I nodded. "As you wish." She placed the ledger on the coffee table. "What should we do for dinner?" "I have chicken. I could roast it with potatoes." "I'll help." We prepared the meal together in the kitchen. She washed the potatoes. I seasoned the chicken. We moved around each other with a new caution, not born of tension, but of a conscious care not to disrupt the fragile peace. We spoke little, only the necessary words about the food. The oven warmed the kitchen. The smell of roasting chicken and rosemary filled the house, a familiar, comforting smell that had been absent for months. We ate at the dining table, not the kitchen one. We used the everyday plates. We did not set a place for him. His absence was a fact in the room, but it was no longer a ghost demanding tribute. It was just an empty chair. We talked a little more about a book I was reading, about a project at her firm. The topics were safe, but the engagement was real. She listened. I listened. After we ate, she stood and began to clear the plates. "I'll do the dishes," she said. "You don't have to." "I know, I want to." I did not argue. I went to the living room and sat in my chair. I could hear the running water, the clink of dishes, the familiar sounds of cleaning up. They were the sounds of a household functioning. They were the sounds I had heard alone for so long. Now they were shared. She joined me later, sitting in her chair. The television was off. The only light came from a single lamp. Dusk settled outside the windows, turning the world blue-gray. "It's quiet," she said. "It is." "A different quiet." "Yes." We sat. I felt the fatigue in my bones, but it was a different fatigue. It was not the exhaustion of holding up a collapsing world. It was the tiredness of a long journey ended. The silence between us was not empty. It was full of the things we now knew. It was a silence that could be inhabited. She looked over at the ledger on the coffee table. "The revenge is complete, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. I followed her gaze. If revenge is the revelation of truth, then yes, it is complete. And what comes after revenge? After revenge comes the peace of having nothing left to hide. After that, whatever you build on that peace. She nodded slowly. "It will take time to build." "It will. But the ground is clear now." "It is." We fell silent again. The room grew darker. I did not turn on another light. She did not move. We just sat in the growing dimness, two women in a house that had been a battlefield, then a museum of secrets, and now was just a house again. The ledger was back in its box. The watch was in her jewelry case. The debts were being addressed. The truth was known. My revenge had been a calculated, cold delivery of facts. It had shattered her world. But it had also, in the breaking, cleared the space for something authentic to possibly grow. There was no victory dance, no triumphant feeling. There was only this, a quiet evening, the shared weight of reality, and the tentative, sober beginning of a relationship based not on stories, but on the unadorned, difficult, and finally liberating truth. She was the one who eventually rose and turned on the lamp. The warm light pushed back the darkness. "I think I'll go to bed," she said. "Good night, Danielle." "Good night, Mom." She left the room. I listened to her footsteps down the hall. I sat for a while longer in the lamplight. Then I stood, turned off the lamp, and went to my own room. The house was silent, but it was a silence I could finally bear. It was my silence, and now, in some small way, it was also hers.